are fact. They're fiction, but they're based on fact, research fact. And Jean actually still lives and exists and goes on about her business. You probably, if I told you who she really is, you'd probably say, oh yeah, I know her. But I'm not going to tell you that because that's not what it's about. But the thing is, she talked to me at length about how she felt and the devastation she felt and the great loss that she felt. And I don't know if anybody's familiar, I'm sure you are, with Dr. David Quinton's work. He was a photojournalist with CBC. He had done something, and it was strange because he and I had been talking back and forth, and I didn't know he was doing what he was doing, and he didn't know I was doing what I was doing. But when I saw the film that he had produced after the moratorium, several years after, and I sent him a copy of my play, we were like, oh my God, you know, we're on the same page, obviously. But anyway, I'm going to read you a bit from Jean now. You'll have to excuse me, I have the flu. I've been fighting it for 2 weeks. But Jean, this is Jean's experience now to a degree. I'm going to tell you about Jean. Over 25 years I went down there, God above. Anyone told me I'd be going back and forth there that long, year in and year out, that first summer, I'd have had some answer for them. That first year, that was the year before I was married, way back in 1966, and nobody could tell me anything then. Like young ones in all the generations, I knowed it all about life. And even when poor mother tried to tell me about what it was like to live down on the rooms, and how hard people had to work down there, and how there was no electricity and things like that, I did my best not to hear a word she was trying to tell me. Didn't want to hear it, so I never. And I suppose it was no wonder I couldn't believe it when I seen it with my own eyes for the first time. Yes, I'd heard tell of it, but that was about all. And hearing it was one thing, but seeing it with my own eyes for that first time was certainly something else. But when we got down handy enough to where we was going, all hands was getting their gear together and getting ready to go ashore. Well, we got off the sea-in boat and we got aboard with a Labrador man who come out in his motorboat to get us. After we steamed along for a bit, we turned in around a point of land into a kind of little cove with a few small little stages and little houses not much bigger than the porch on houses home, and he cut the engine. I looks at George, thinking there was something the matter with the boat, and he winks at me and says, "We're here, Jean girl." His voice sounded right proud when he said it, and I said, "We're here." And he said, "Yeah." And he grinned at me. And I said, "Oh my God, that's not where we got to stay." And he, still with the foolish grin on his face, says, "That's where we got to stay." So now I'm going to read you a little bit from another lady. Her name's Caroline. Caroline was a young woman who, in order for her to get there to the Labrador, she ended up getting married. So I'm going to read you a little bit from Caroline. Caroline represents the 1940s. My, how I minds them days. Long spell ago. Though it seems only like yesterday sometimes. But you know, the war was still on when me and Les got wed. The Second World War. Me and Lester was only married a few days before we went down there. And you talk about scrabbling to get our gear together and get it down to the wharf in Carbonear and ready to put it aboard of the old Kyle. Looking back on it, sure I was only a young maid, 18 years old, and all of a sudden I was a married woman. Now that first summer I went down to the room, I never planned for it. That year Les wanted someone to cook for the crew down on the room, and we was walking out for nigh on to 2 years by that time. Off and on, because in the summer he'd be on the Labrador fishing, and in the winter he'd be up in the woods cutting logs, so we never spent a lot of time in one another's company. Although I must say, we had some grand times when we did get together. Now that spring, the woman they was depending on went up along with her aunt to the Boston States, and went in service up there, and never come back. So they never had a soul they could call on to go down to the room. The only other woman they knowed of was married to one of the crew, but she was expecting her second baby in a couple of weeks, and she couldn't go down that year. Anyhow, it come in his mind he wanted me to go down and cook for him. Father and mother wouldn't hear telling me going down there to cook for a crowd of men, a young maid going down with the men she was walking out with, and not another woman in the room. No, that'd only make talk, and Father wouldn't hear tell of it. Now Lester had his mind made up about it anyhow. So he says to me this night, Karen, I knows how to square that with the skipper. We'll get married before we goes, and then they'll be satisfied. She knows I wants to marry anyhow, so now is as good a time as any. And so we did. Now, the next one I'm going to read you a little bit from. I'm going to introduce you to Maud. Maud's era is 1910. And Maud, I guess, was the matriarch or the supervisor, or I think she was the boss myself. But anyway, the merchant had, down on the room on the Labrador, on the coast, the merchant had his rooms, which meant he had a salt store and a store for all his provisions. And up on the hill he had a house. And this house would house his agent, who oversaw everything, and his Marconi man, who sent out all the little dots and dashes to him and let him know who was paying what for fish where. And occasionally, if the merchant came down and brought someone himself, well, they stayed in the big house too. But Maud, who was the chief cook and bottle washer and ran the whole show, and nobody could have gotten along without her, she was there, she lived there as well. But the merchant had 2 serving girls that he sent down with her. Anyway, Maud says, you know, cooking and cleaning for that crowd of men is not easy. But the merchant is good to us, and I got to say, in spite of it all, I likes it down here on the room. There's no shortage of rough grub. That's a fact. And 'tis a lovely house in the summer. Now, I don't know if I want to spend the winters down here, because they says when the snow flies here, there's no flies. One thing I know is we works for our wages, and this is no place for the sluggard. Just keeping the dishes washed up here sure is a full-time job for one of them maids we got here. She had her mind on her work. Now for the past 3 summers, and that started, let me see, 1906 I believe, and it's the same this summer, we only got a small crew on, 34, including the merchant's agent, myself and the 2 maids they send down to help me. Truth be told, them 2 maids is better at helping themselves. The grub, the sleeping in of a morning till I roots them out. And I guarantee you, young Rachel will be some quick to helping herself to Captain Billy Williams when he's ashore if I give her half a chance. I don't know, he'd do a lot of bawling and complaining if she did help herself. Fine gentleman that he is. Now this is Rachel now coming up. Rachel is one of the maids. Rachel is 18 years old. And Rachel is not overly happy with Maud. One of these days, I knows I won't be able to stop myself. I allow she got it coming, and I'll douse that crooked old Maud right in the mouth. She never lets up on me, and she's always bawling at me about something. No odds what I does, or how much, she's never satisfied, and she watches me like the hawk. Now I wonder for why she never got married. Anything that crooked wouldn't be able to hold on to a man anyhow. You wouldn't know, but she owned everything down here in this God-forsaken hole. If I could, I'd be on the next schooner out of the Labrador and go wherever she was going as long as it wasn't back to Carbonear. Because I knows me mother would banish me if I come back with no wages. I dare say Captain Billy Williams wouldn't mind having me cooking on his schooner. If I could get him out to sea, away from old Maud's nosy face, I wouldn't mind taking my chances with him. For long, I'd be Mrs. Captain Billy Williams, and my days cooking and scrubbing on this room wouldn't even come to mind. And the first time I seen Maddie after that, she wouldn't know me, I'd be that grand. But I'd get close enough to her so she could get a good look at me in me fancy rig, and before she got a chance to open her gob, right quick I'd tell her to kiss me arse, and I'd put a smile on my face. See how Maddie'd like that. No love lost. So we're back to Caroline now. Remember she was off getting wed? We got down there late on a Sunday, and I just turned 19 that day. Lester looked at me and said, "You got no cake for your birthday this year, Caroline, my dear." Now this young feller, who was part of his crew, and come down on the Kyle with us, spoke up and said, "Why, she have got a cake then, and a fruit cake with that." Now his mother baked him a cake for the passage down and put it in his Labrador box. But he never touched it because it was rough most of the way down, and he was feeling a bit qualmish and couldn't stomach it, he said. Bless his heart. He took it out and cut it up, and right proud he was to do it, and you talk about a lovely bit of fruit cake. I never forgot the cake I had for my 19th birthday on the Labrador. Now that young feller who didn't mind sharing his cake with me. Back to Maud. Young Jessie's not too bad for her age, I suppose. But that Rachel, she's one young trollop if I ever knowed one. One night last week, I got up to get a drink of cold water because we had salt fish for supper and it was too salt. I told young Rachel to change the water on it before we went to bed the night before, and she, as saucy as a cracky, turned on me and said, "What do you think? I'm stunned, my maid? Sure, I dare say I knows how to water a bit of fish, and I'll change the water on it when I gets the time." I don't know when or if she changed it, but 'twas as salt as lac when we eat it for supper the next night, and my bit of drawn butter was the only thing that redeemed it. Now I'm going to introduce you to Jessie. Jessie is 15, and it's her first time to the coast of the Labrador. And Jessie thought she died and went to heaven when she got her job. But you just listen. "I'm some tired. I hates the sight of a spud, and if I never sees another one, I'll be glad of it. I'm sick of peeling carrots and turnip and cleaning cabbage and mixing up duffs. And worst of it all is the friggin' dishes. I sets the table 7 times a day, and between the meals and the mug-ups, sure the table is never cleared away of dishes. And if they're dirty, you knows who got to wash them. Me 2 hands is as red as a piece of beef. The first thing ahead of me when I opens my eyes in the morning is to be dishing up grub. And the last thing I have to do in the night is to set the table for more grub in the morning. I never thought this when I come down to work on the room. My God, how many pots of raw oats do I cook in the run of a week? And fish and brews and baked beans. I knows now why my grandmother